Okay, so have you ever been like just grabbing coffee, making small talk with someone in line, or maybe chatting with another dog owner at the park, and it gets you thinking like, wow, all these little moments, these chance encounters, could they actually lead to something bigger?
Totally. We don't always realize it, but those seemingly insignificant interactions, they hold so much potential.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today with Networking Unleashed. This book is all about unlocking the power of those everyday moments.
What I find fascinating about this book is how it kind of reframes our whole perception of networking, you know? It's not about those awkward networking events or like shoving your business card into everyone's
Hey,
hand.
please, no more of those.
It's really about, making connection a natural part of your everyday life.
And the book uses a really great analogy to get this point across, comparing building your network to something you might already do, cultivating a garden.
Yeah. And what I love about that analogy is that it highlights how important patience and consistent effort are in this process. I mean, you wouldn't expect to just plant a seed one day and have a thriving garden the next, right?
Exactly. It takes time, and the same goes for building a strong network. It's about planting those seeds, those small interactions, moments of kindness, and nurturing them over time.
And what I think is really interesting is that the book goes beyond just the gardening metaphor, you know? Like
Yeah.
it actually delves into the psychology behind building connections.
And it talks a lot about the importance of generosity, right?
Yeah, and not in a transactional way, like, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine.
Totally. Not keeping score. It's more about approaching every interaction with a genuine desire to help, to offer value, without expecting anything in return.
And that's really what Networking Unleashed emphasizes, that it's about approaching everything with a genuine desire to connect and to offer value. It's that feeling you get when you help a friend in need. It just feels good. And, more often than not, that generosity will circle back to you in some unexpected way.
Speaking of unexpected, the book tells this amazing story about a woman named Joyce who's just starting out in the tech world.
Oh, yeah, Joyce. I remember her. She was at one of those overwhelming startup events, feeling totally lost, when she met Max.
And Max was working on like this really cool healthcare app, right?
Yeah, exactly. And Joyce, she didn't even try to pitch herself or her ideas to him or anything.
She was just genuinely interested in what he was doing.
Yeah, and she just listened. And then she offered him advice based on her own experiences, shared some resources, just simple things, but she was genuinely trying to help.
And that right there, that's the beauty of genuine connection.
And you know what? It ended up playing a huge role in her success down the line.
Okay, everyone, get this. A few months after that initial meeting at the event, Max ended up introducing Joyce to a venture capitalist.
Whoa!
Yeah. And that VC ended up funding Joyce's own startup. Talk about what goes around comes around.
Wow. What a story. And it perfectly illustrates what the book talks about in terms of becoming a connector. It's not just about, making introductions. It's about genuinely wanting to connect people and see them succeed.
So for anyone listening who might be thinking, okay, this all sounds amazing, but like, I'm not exactly a natural connector. Where do I even start? Well, don't worry, because Networking Unleashed has got you covered. It offers some seriously actionable advice. And it all starts with understanding your own strengths.
Yeah, and that's something I really appreciate about this book, how it encourages you to own your expertise. Like, it even gives you practical tips on how to actually talk about your accomplishments and what you bring to the table, and not in a way that feels, braggy or anything.
Right, because it's not about bragging. It's about genuinely communicating your value, right?
Exactly.
So when you're clear on your own strengths, it makes it easier to see how you can be of service to others. But, it's not all about those strong connections, the people already in our immediate circle. And this book really opened my eyes to the power of what they call weak ties.
Oh, yeah, those more distant connections.
Yeah, those acquaintances, former colleagues, people you might not talk to every single day.
It's amazing how often we kind of underestimate the impact those weaker ties can have.
I know. We tend to focus so much on our inner circle that we forget about those more distant connections.
Because those aren't the people you're, calling up for career advice every other day or anything. But they could be the ones who introduce you to a whole new field or new opportunity. Even just offer a fresh perspective you'd never even considered before.
Right. It's like they open these doors you didn't even know existed.
Yeah.
It reminds me of this time when I bumped into an old colleague from my very first job out of college.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, and we always got along well, but we hadn't really stayed in touch that much since then. But anyway, turns out she was now working in renewable energy.
Interesting.
which is a field, I'll be honest, I was really curious about, but I had absolutely no idea how to even get my foot in the door.
Yeah, it can be tough to break into a new field like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But anyway, that chance encounter with my former colleague, it sparked some really interesting conversations. Like, she gave me some amazing insights into the industry and even connected me with a few people in her network.
Wow, what are the chances? That's the amazing thing about weak ties. They can act as bridges to those completely new networks and possibilities that you might not otherwise have access to. It's like the book says, networking isn't an event, it's a way of life.
That's so true.
It's about being present in your interactions, showing genuine interest in other people, and being open to those unexpected detours that life throws your way.
That's such a good point. I think a lot of times we can get so caught up in like the idea of what networking is supposed to be, all those structured events and formal introductions.
Totally.
And we forget that the most meaningful connections often happen when we least expect them.
Absolutely. But I think there's also a lot of baggage and misconceptions surrounding the whole idea of networking.
Well, definitely.
Like it can feel kind of icky and transactional, like it's all about what you can get from someone else.
Yeah, that's just not what it's about at all.
It shouldn't be, because at its core, networking, I think, it's really about building those authentic, genuine relationships.
Totally. It's not about just racking up business cards or collecting LinkedIn connections. It's about connecting with people on a human level.
Mm-hmm.
And Networking Unleashed really hammers that home, that shift in mindset.
It does. It encourages you to approach interactions with that curiosity and that willingness to connect on a human level. And when you approach it that way, that's when the magic really happens.
Right. And it doesn't have to be this big, overwhelming, complicated thing either.
No, not at all.
Like, the book actually gives a ton of really practical tips on how to incorporate networking into your daily life in a way that feels, natural and manageable.
For sure. Small gestures can go a long way, like sending a quick congratulatory email or reaching out to someone you admire, or even just, making that effort to strike up a conversation with someone new. It's really about building those small habits of connection, even if you only have a few minutes here and there.
Exactly. And I think that's such an important point.
Yeah.
Because it makes networking feel so much less daunting. Like, it doesn't have to be this big time-consuming thing.
Yeah, because consistency is key. Just like, if you want a beautiful garden, you don't just water it once a month, right? You got to nurture it regularly.
Exactly.
And the more you nurture your network, those connections you make, the more you create this incredible web of support and reciprocity.
Which brings us right back to that gardening metaphor, doesn't it?
It all comes full circle. Just like a garden thrives when you give it consistent care and attention, the same goes for your network.
It's about nurturing those relationships, those connections that bring you joy and support your growth. But, just like with gardening, not every seed you plant is guaranteed to sprout. And sometimes you need to do a little pruning.
Ooh, that's a great analogy.
Right. So maybe there are some connections in your life, in your network, that are no longer serving you. Or maybe they no longer align with your values.
Yeah, sometimes you got to let go of what's no longer working.
Exactly. And honestly, letting go of those relationships that aren't serving you anymore, that can be incredibly freeing.
It can, because it makes space for those new, more aligned connections.
It creates space for those new, more fulfilling relationships to blossom. This whole conversation, it really reminds me of something Networking Unleashed talks about. When you approach networking the right way, it's not about climbing some imaginary ladder. It's more about weaving a web.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, and that web, it supports not just your own aspirations, but it also supports the aspirations of everyone within it.
Absolutely. And it really highlights how we all have something unique and valuable to bring to the table. And by supporting each other, we create this ripple effect of growth and opportunity.
Totally. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive already, from those unexpected encounters to the power of nurturing all those different kinds of connections. I have to say, this book has completely changed my whole perspective on networking.
Mine too. It's not about forcing it or trying to fit into some predefined mold. It's about showing up authentically, being genuinely curious about the people you meet, and trusting that those right connections, they'll naturally come into your life.
And as you go about your week, just remember all those seemingly insignificant moments. A quick chat with a colleague, a kind word to a stranger, or even just reconnecting with an old friend. You just never know. Those small acts of connection, those seeds you plant, they really can blossom into something amazing. So get out there, nurture those connections, and see what incredible things can grow.